Hi, all. My name is Heron, and today I wanted to talk to you a bit about something that's been on my mind a lot lately, which I think a lot of artists can relate to. A few times since I started posting my artwork publicly to social media, a couple sort of maybe well meaning friends have approached me with advice or their opinion on ways in which I should change my art in order to improve it. And unfortunately, when I tell these people I'm not interested in taking your advice, I don't want to change my artwork, things can get a little heated, a little emotional. I think a lot of people don't like being told that they're wrong, but that goes both ways. And so by imposing their very strong opinion, their strong criticism on the artist, neither person is going to be very happy. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do to deal with this sort of unwanted criticism or advice, and how it affects us as artists, and how we can sort of create an emotional buffer that allows us to feel secure in our creative vision. It can be difficult to take unwanted criticism about your artwork in particular because the art that we make can be very personal to us. So we spend hours and hours pouring our deepest, darkest emotions onto the page, only to be told that somebody thinks it's not good enough, not well made. And this, it cuts deep, right? It cuts very deep down into your very soul. It's like somebody approached you and said, I think your baby is ugly. It's not a good feeling. Unfortunately, this type of criticism is not uncommon to artists. I think a lot of artists experience criticism for being artists in general from a very young age and may be considered weird, unusual, might be considered too emotional, too sensitive, too vulnerable for wanting to share those deep feelings. And so this is something that a lot of artists view more as a cultural problem, right? We live in a culture where it is frowned upon to be an artist, where we're told as artists that we should do something more financially incentivized, more useful, more traditionally productive. Society disrespects artists very, very frequently, despite art being one of the backbones of our society. And I think for this reason, a lot of artists are so used to being criticized in a general way by society that it just adds an additional layer of discomfort and dissatisfaction when we receive that sort of critique from our friends as well. Another thing that is important to consider is that a lot of artists famously have received widespread criticism by people who didn't understand their artistic vision. When you think about when Picasso invented Cubism, right? And nobody had ever done anything like that. He basically invented modern art. And the people who criticized Picasso's work said that it was ugly, that it was not a good form of portraiture. So he had to really push back against mainstream society in order to realize this artistic vision, which would change the industry forever. I think a lot of us have heard the story of Van Gogh, who very famously didn't sell barely a single painting in his lifetime, right? He was told again and again that his work was not good enough to be in galleries, not good enough to sell. And it was only thanks to the work of his brother and his sister-in-law after his death that his paintings became so famous and influential around the world. And so when we think about something like this, we think that, artists have historically had to fight against criticism their entire lives. How do we know that we're on the right track? How can we find this inner strength inside of us as artists that says, no, it's not me who's wrong. The world doesn't understand my vision. And it is a very, very difficult thing to feel, to believe about yourself when faced with backlash against your work. So we hear a lot of platitudes in the art world, like there's no wrong way to make art. And I think it's hard to believe, right? It's hard to internalize. And it's even harder when maybe you take an art class, you talk to a teacher, and they say, no, there is a wrong way to do this. You're doing this wrong. So how can both things be true? But they are. And that's because there are many, many different theories behind how to make art correctly. So there is a correct way to make art within that system, within that belief, maybe within that best practice. But every rule is meant to be broken. So when we're studying art in school, when we're studying art in art class, the teacher might give you criticism about your anatomy, about your use of color, right? And that's to help you learn within the context of the rules of that class. The problem becomes if people maybe take an art class, understand that these are types of critique we give to students, and then try to apply them out in the real world to other artists. And the problem then becomes that they're making an assumption that you are still using those same principles that they learned in school in your own artwork. But because there are many, many, many different ways of making art, there are many types of color theories, there are many types of composition, there are many types of line art, there are many ways to do these things, both within a structure and that structured system's rules, and outside of the rules by intentionally breaking them. And that is the general problem with critiquing an artist's work without knowing their full intention, without being inside their head, because you may be basing that critique off of something that they're not using, off of a system of making art that they're not using. And you also may misunderstand their goals. For example, color theory, in the sense of using complementary colors on a color wheel, was first invented by Isaac Newton. So if you use Isaac Newton's original color wheel, then complementary colors, opposite colors, would be blue and orange. But other people have since developed other color wheels which have slight variations in the color spectrum they use, making it so that the opposite of blue is actually yellow. So if you say to somebody, I'm using complementary colors in this piece and they're blue and yellow, if they're using a different color wheel from yours, they may criticize you and say, those aren't complementary. The complement of blue is orange. And it then becomes sort of a they said versus they said, who is right? And of course, the answer is they're both right. They both have different ways of doing things. They're both using a different system. And there's no wrong way to do that. So the next question then becomes, okay, if I want to feel confident in my vision, in my system of doing things, of making art, how do I feel confident if it's all relative, if there's many different systems? And furthermore, I think a lot of artists don't really relate to the idea of being able to break down every single thing you would do through the lens of art history or some sort of formal study, right? It might come down to something as simple as, I made this piece because I saw a beautiful flower and I wanted to capture it and I had fun making it. And you know what? If that's your system, then that is completely valid. And what I want you to practice saying then, in response to people who criticize your work, is just no. No is a complete answer. No is a good enough response. You are always allowed to say, I disagree with you. I'm not going to change the way I do things. I have my way of doing things and you have yours. And that's okay. Unfortunately, the people criticizing you might not appreciate that because, as I mentioned, they often are really seeking validation in the form of overriding your own opinion. So, because of this, I think sometimes it can still be very difficult to feel confident when faced with somebody criticizing your work who is so passionate in their belief that you must do things their way. So, one of the things that helps me a lot when I run into this problem is spending a lot of time sitting with my own art so that I feel confident that I'm familiar with what I'm doing. And it sort of, it helps that critique bounce off of you, right? It helps you just push it away because you can say, you know what? I've spent enough time sitting with my art. I understand how it works. I understand what I love about it. And it's okay for you to not have the same emotional attachment that I do. But here's why I like it. So, one of the things that I've come to love about my art is that I use art to try to communicate with people. I use art to try to communicate a specific feeling, a sensation, usually a joyful one, something positive about the world, a sense of hopefulness. And because of this desire that I have, because I want to make people feel these certain things, sometimes I find that writing is an easier medium to convey these concepts than visual art. So that is one of the reasons I've been learning how to make these videos. I've been speaking a little more, trying to get over being camera shy, right? So I can convey my complex ideas in another medium. It's also why I look for inspiration in people like Mr. Rogers, Steve from Blue's Clues, Bob Ross, people who really use multiple creative mediums in order to convey a cohesive, positive message. So, for this reason, when I was recently criticized for talking too much about my feelings, it was easy for me to reject that feedback because destigmatizing emotional health and emotional topics and emotional vulnerability is very important. It's one of my core values. And so it was easy for me to say, I reject this advice because this is going against my values. And I think looking back on it, what she meant was that she wanted me to make more art, focus more on the art, because she believed that my goal as an artist is to sell visual art, to make more visual art. But the problem became that she did not listen to my feedback about my actual goals as an artist. And this is very important because if you make an assumption about what an artist wants, you don't know what is in their head, you don't know what their actual goals are. And it's very easy to give sort of harsh, judgmental, unwanted advice to somebody who is trying to do something very personal. I had another similar experience with a friend who tried to give me advice on my composition a few months prior. And she was very passionate and adamant about her opinion, which was that I needed to change the composition of one of my pieces. And I tried to patiently explain to her, that's not the composition that I'm going for. I have a very specific goal in mind. My composition is based off of a Fibonacci spiral, which is one of Leonardo da Vinci's favorite compositional types. And when I told her this, she responded with, "What does that mean?" And it was very clear to me that she had studied a very different type of composition and was trying to judge my composition without having studied the same type. And this really emphasizes what I've been talking about, which is that you can't know another artist's goals without living in their head, without at least asking them, right? So if you're an artist and you're trying to find your style, feel very confident in your goals, your artistic values, here's my advice. I want you to love your art unconditionally. I want you to spend more and more time with it. Hang it on your wall, stare at it every day, put it in front of your bed. I want you to sit with your art and think about all the things you love about it. And that will help you refine those things more and more. Because if you say, I really love this color palette, I really love this composition, I really love this style, maybe I'll use it again, right? Maybe I'll use it some more. And maybe I'll keep refining it and keep going in that direction until I end up with a style that I feel so confident in. It is just so me. So, none of this is to say that you shouldn't take constructive criticism or constructive feedback, right? There is a very, very wonderful experience as an artist in asking other artists for their feedback, for their ideas, and collaborating and refining your style, learning new techniques. It is a very important, fundamental part of the process. But the important thing is that that needs to be your choice, what you're working on and what feedback you take, because if it's not you, then it's not really your art, it's somebody else's. Van Gogh barely sold a single piece in his lifetime, but he still continued to make artwork that was meaningful for him. And later, after his death, it became very important and very meaningful to the rest of society, to the rest of the art world. And this really, I think, emphasizes the point that we're not making art for everyone, right? You're not making art for the entire world. There's never going to be a way of making artwork that everybody universally loves because art is so subjective. It is more meaningful. It's more important for us to make art for ourselves. And the reason that we put art out into the world is not to be rich and famous, right? Not for most of us anyway. It's typically more to find the people who connect to our unique style, to the things that are special about our work, to find our tribe. Say, for example, you are an artist who loves making sort of creepy dolls with like multiple heads and that sort of thing. And most people look at your work and go, not for me. But then after a while, after you post it to social media, it comes across the feed of somebody who has the exact same obsession, right? They've been collecting these creepy two-headed dolls their whole life. They see your work and they immediately click and they go, you are it. You are my favorite artist in the world. I'm so obsessed with your style. And you click and you just realize that you're these sort of kindred spirits. That is what most artists live for. That is what we're looking for. Not for the entire world to amazingly realize that we're this flawless, perfect artist. We're looking for that one person who just gets it. For the right person, your artwork can be what they need on a deep level. It can speak to a part of their soul that has never been seen in that light. It can change people's lives, make them feel more connected to the world, make them feel something that they lost, remind them of their childhood. Art can be an incredibly powerful experience. And it can be difficult as an artist to believe that what you're making could have that impact on somebody else. It can be difficult to be confident enough that no matter what skill level you're at, no matter your style, there is somebody out there looking to connect with it. But there is. Let your creations be a gentle whisper to the universe, a message in a bottle tossed to sea. Let it say, "This is who I am. This is what I value." And let it find someday the person it is meant to find. Or maybe your goal in art is to get famous and make a lot of money, in which case you can ignore all of this advice because, yet again, you don't need somebody else to validate what you're doing. You are allowed to say no, even when it's coming from me. All right. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Take care. Stay safe, y'all. I'll see you in the next one.